The next thing I wanted to ask about is when we look at, the emphasis on certain positions. So in dynasty leagues, particularly, sometimes players might need a running back. They may not have a running back at that point, and they may kind of try and force that piece into that hole to make sure that the roster for week one looks good rather than thinking the longer term picture. When you're looking at rookie drafts, are you emphasizing certain positions over others? Are you going just for, where you think this player's long-term potential is? Are you looking at year one versus year three, for example? And how are you attacking some of those rookie drafts? And for this question, we'll hold it first to non-super flex, so we'll make it.
I think generally speaking, and this is how I build my teams mostly, is I focus heavily on receivers because I think, in addition to, I think they're just they have longer careers. There's like a wider range of outcomes. If you have a bunch of really good receivers on your team, I think it gives you a bigger window for when you're going to be able to compete. They're also, I think, they're more tradable. I'm not like a huge trade. I don't do a ton of trades. Like I just find like trade negotiating kind of like tedious, which is why, by the way, I'm on a lot of teams with Scott Barrett, who's really good at trading because he does all the trade work. And I'm just like, yeah, that sounds good. Like I just can't, I don't have the patience to do trade negotiations, which is probably why I'm terrible at trading. But I think they're more like liquid assets in the sense that like you could trade a young receiver for pretty much anything. Whereas like if you have a older, like Ezekiel Elliott, I think is a good example. Like it's hard to trade him right now because you have to have a very specific trade partner. It's like the Russell Wilson trade. Like the CX could have got a lot more if he hadn't had a trade clause in his contract where he could like veto trades. Basically, it came down to like there's one or two teams that they could trade him to, and that like lowers your ability to like get teams against each other and that kind of thing. So I think that's how I build my teams in general. I like to build with a lot of receivers, have a lot of those guys, and then you can trade them for, in certain cases you can trade them for like established running backs, guys like Javonte Williams or some of these lower level like starting running backs, maybe David Montgomery or something like that. If you're contending in that year, but then of course like early on in the first, like I'm definitely willing to take some of the elite running backs early on in the first round. I'm not like totally looking past those guys, but generally speaking, everything else considered, I'll probably take a receiver over a running back just because of the career length and everything around those guys. I just like to have those guys on my roster a little bit more. I do recognize that having an elite running back is a game changer, but I think it's also harder to find those guys.
Yeah, I think so. My approach will be very similar to what you've talked through there. In terms, though, if we look at Superflex, then are you kind of looking the same way, unless it's a quarterback that you really think has long-term prospects, or how are you feeling in Superflex?
Yeah, I think I go back to the draft where Justin Herbert was falling in the first round, and there were so many times I could have drafted Justin Herbert. And I'm just like, damn it, why did I take whoever over Justin Herbert? But generally speaking, like it's the same deal. The quarterbacks are so it's so hard for them to like actually have to develop into like an elite player. There's just so many misses at that position. I know it's a little bit better nowadays. But like I was even like passing up a lot on Zach Wilson, even though he's the second overall pick. It's just like I wasn't completely sold on him as a prospect. And I think it's still like the jury's definitely still out on that. They're not, generally speaking, they're not as useful early in their career as running backs and receivers. But of course, if you don't have a quarterback in Superflex, like you're screwed. So there's a balance there. And I think I would say I'm more on the side of like trading for a veteran like Kirk Cousins than taking a rookie quarterback in the rookie draft. So that's just kind of how I am, how I attack like rookie drafts. I just think it's nerve-wracking to take a quarterback that early.
Yeah, and I was about to kind of say that I would probably like sometimes to take that opportunity on the guys as they get older. We're seeing these quarterbacks play for much longer. The window used to start to close at 32, and now the window with like Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers is 40 years, or for Brady nearly 45 years old. So you can get some of these guys a little bit cheaper. So a way to look at it. So when we touched there, you talked about the wide receivers. We looked about the way to maybe try and value running backs in early in the start of the round. And then we talked about Superflex and kind of didn't change a huge amount for you there. But are there some exploitable elements in these rookie drafts? I think you might already touched on one of your key ones already when you said the players that drop from pre-draft or pre-combine to post-combine. Is there any other exploitable elements in rookie drafts for you?
I think, and Shawn, I think you've been a proponent of this too. It's like throwing darts at ridiculous athletes or elite producers. So, like, for instance, if you have an elite producer who's just at a lower level, like, the odds are that player is a good player. Elijah Mitchell is the guy that comes to mind. Like, he was an elite athlete and an elite producer at the college level. For whatever reason, people weren't super high on him. I think it's probably because he was playing at a lower level. But then he comes in, he's the second running back picked in his own team, and he still is the starter. So, like, you take shots on guys like that later on. And then another guy that comes to mind for this question is like a guy like AJ Dillon, who I think that the dynasty community was pretty split on him. There was definitely a lot of people that didn't really like AJ Dillon, like kind of viewed him as a big plotter who can't catch. And I scooped up a bunch of AJ Dillon because I'm like, this guy is the closest athlete to Derrick Henry that we've seen, really. I know that he's not Derrick Henry, but like, he's 250 pounds. He runs like a 4.5 or whatever. And I think he's pretty agile and graceful as a runner. They can teach him how to catch in theory, hopefully. And I think he's actually been a pretty good, receiver relative to what people thought he would be. So, you're not going to hit on all those players, but I think AJ Dillon, I was getting AJ Dillon in like the third round of rookie drafts and Superflex rookie drafts. And so I'm like scooping that guy up every time. So throwing darts at ridiculous athletes, I think, is kind of like what I'm getting to, because just the odds that they're going to turn into an NFL caliber player are better. Antonio Gibson, another example. Chase Claypool, another example, I think, are guys that fell because they didn't have strong analytical profiles, but just elite athletes that teams want to give the ball to. And so I think those are kind of guys you can take shots on. Again, it's not going to have a high hit rate, but I think it's better than probably going for a guy with like a lower floor, I guess. And so those are kind of things that I look for, like when you're getting into like the tougher decisions at like who to take in the third and fourth round. Those are, I think, good edges that you can keep in mind.
Yeah, I really like that, to target players who do have some big standout element, even if obviously there are some warts on their resume
Right.
or they wouldn't still be at that point. Danny, obviously you're there, you're watching these guys, figuring out which running backs can make the players miss, which wide receivers have that run after the catch ability and these other abilities. You're in there and you have such a great familiarity with the college players. How does that element translate to rookie draft strategy in terms of subsequent seasons? How much are you placing on sort of players are going to come along in future years, and how that plays into how you want to not only manage your rookie draft, but construct your team in general?
To be totally honest, it doesn't really factor all that much. I know that I probably should have a wider view of like the 2023 class is renowned, obviously, already as like going to be really good. So people are very excited about that. And when that is like the buzz or like the scuttlebutt, maybe I'm not like looking to trade my 2023 like firsts very much or whatever. But like that's about the limit of what I'll put on it, because I think every year the class turns out to be something different than what people think it's going to be. That's just kind of like how it always seems to happen. And so the other thing is like, and this is maybe me channeling like my inner Mike Shanahan nihilist or whatever, but I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 2 years. Like, I'm not looking forward that far. Like I want instant gratification. I want to put players on my team now. I'm just too impatient, I think, to like, for instance, like trade a bunch of 2022 firsts for 2023 firsts. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be alive in 2023. I don't want to like wait that long. I'm too late. I'm too impatient. I want instant gratification now. So that's probably not like the sharp way to do it, but that's just kind of how I do it. And also, I actually don't do Devy leagues or anything like that. I'm not, I think, sharp enough to know. I guess I know my limitations on like, I don't have a strong grasp on like what the 2023, 2024 class is looking like at this point. I probably should do that going forward. And I've had a few invites to get into Devy leagues, but I just haven't had like the bandwidth to do it really, to be honest. So, I just don't really approach it that way. I'm kind of just like, living for the now and keeping, I guess, like one eye on like the next year, but like not really anything further down the line.
Well, I mean, you could be in charge of your own NFL team at this point a year from now. So, at that point, you'd have to give up some of these dynasty leagues. playing for the future, it wouldn't matter.
Did you enjoy that clip? Make sure you hit that subscribe button to get more content from RotoViz. And of course, you can check out full-length podcasts at rotoviz.com/podcast. Available on all podcast platforms. Check out our wide range of content. Once again, rotoviz.com/podcast.